Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The first snow of 1901 fell unusually early across the Ozark Mountains of southern Missouri. In the small logging town of Blackwell, nestled between the rolling hills and dense forests, most residents welcomed the pristine white blanket as a momentary reprieve from the relentless work of timber harvesting. All except for Thomas Hayes, the town's only doctor, who found himself trudging through ankle-deep snow toward the abandoned Thornfield Hotel in the early hours of November 17th. According to the Blackwell County Register, Dr. Hayes had received an urgent message delivered by a young boy who had appeared at his door, handed him a folded paper, and disappeared back into the darkness before the doctor could ask any questions. The note, later preserved in the county archives, contained just 4 words. Thornfield. Come alone. Hurry. The Thornfield Hotel stood 3 miles outside of town, perched atop a steep hill overlooking the North Fork River. For nearly 7 years, it had remained empty, its windows boarded, its reputation tainted. As Dr. Hayes approached the imposing structure, he would later recount that he hesitated, not from the bitter cold, but from the inexplicable feeling of being watched by the building itself. What he discovered inside would lead to one of the most disturbing investigations in Ozark history, and uncover the depraved activities of the Thornfield brothers, Edwin and Walter, who had built and operated the hotel from 1890 to 1894. Their story, pieced together through county records, personal journals, and the testimony of survivors, reveals a calculated depravity that seems almost inconceivable in its methodical execution. The Thornfield brothers arrived in Blackwell in the spring of 1889, presenting themselves as successful hoteliers from St. Louis, seeking to establish a luxury retreat for wealthy tourists looking to escape the summer heat of the cities. Edwin, the younger at 38, possessed a refined manner that immediately impressed the town council. He spoke eloquently of bringing prosperity to the region, of showcasing the natural beauty of the Ozarks to those who could afford to appreciate it. Walter, 42, was more reserved but equally well-spoken, handling the financial discussions with the local bank and property owners. According to town meeting minutes dated April 12, 1889, the brothers presented architectural drawings of a grand 3-story structure, featuring modern amenities unusual for the region, indoor plumbing throughout, electric lighting powered by a generator, and even telephone connections to the nearest switchboard in West Plains, some 30 miles distant. The council approved their proposal unanimously, eager for the economic boost such an establishment would bring. They purchased 20 acres of land on what would later be named Thornfield Hill and began construction immediately. According to building permits filed with the county clerk, the hotel was designed to have 32 rooms spread across 3 floors, with a large dining hall, parlor, and observation deck offering panoramic views of the river valley below. Walter handled the business aspects, securing loans from the Merchants Bank in Springfield and hiring local men for construction. Edwin oversaw the architectural details, insisting on specific modifications to the original plans. These modifications, innocuous at the time, would later be revealed as instrumental to their disturbing activities. They paid well and on time, recalled James Whitaker, one of the carpenters who worked on the project, in a statement given to investigators in 1902. Walter was always cordial, shaking hands, asking after our families. Edwin kept to himself, checking measurements, making notes. They seemed like businessmen, nothing more. Though I do remember finding it odd how particular Edwin was about certain walls being thicker than seemed necessary, and about the placement of the service elevator. When I suggested a more efficient location, he became quite stern, saying the plans couldn't be altered. Construction proceeded through the summer and fall of 1889, with the brothers importing materials from as far away as Chicago and New York. Local merchants noted the unusual quantities of certain supplies, excessive amounts of soundproofing materials, specialized locks manufactured by a company in Philadelphia known for their use in psychiatric institutions, and custom-made glass containers whose purpose was not readily apparent. "I thought they were for preserving food," stated Harold Mercer, owner of Blackwell General Store, who facilitated many of the special orders. Walter explained they were planning to can and sell local berries and honey as souvenirs to guests. Seemed reasonable enough at the time. The hotel opened to great fanfare on June 12, 1890. The Blackwell Register described it as a marvel of modern comfort in our humble mountains, noting the installation of indoor plumbing, electric lighting, and furnishings imported from Europe. For the first season, the Thornfield Hotel operated exactly as promised, hosting primarily wealthy families from St. Louis, Kansas City, and even Chicago, who arrived by train to the nearest station in West Plains, where a Thornfield carriage would collect them for the final leg of their journey. "It transformed our little town," recalled Beatrice Williams, wife of Sheriff Williams, in a letter to her sister preserved in family records. "Suddenly we had visitors from the cities, spending money in our shops, asking about local history. The Thornfields even organized weekly concerts in the town square, bringing in musicians from Springfield. It seemed like the beginning of a new era for Blackwell." The brothers quickly established themselves as respected members of the community. Walter joined the town council, while Edwin gave lectures on architecture and modern engineering at the local school. They attended church services regularly at the Blackwell Methodist Church, though observers noted they never participated in communion. They made substantial donations to local causes, including funding a new roof for the schoolhouse and contributing to the construction of a proper jail to replace the single holding cell at the back of the sheriff's office. The first hint that something might be amiss came in August of 1890, when Mrs. Eleanor Prescott, a widow from Chicago, reported to the local sheriff that she had awakened in the night to find her room door unlocked, despite having secured it before retiring. Sheriff Williams dismissed her concerns, suggesting she had perhaps forgotten to lock it properly. Mrs. Prescott checked out the following morning, cutting her planned 2-week stay to just 3 days. By all accounts, the first season was a financial success. The hotel closed for the winter in October, as planned, with the brothers announcing renovations to enhance the comfort of their guests for the following season. It was during this winter closure that locals reported unusual activity at the property, deliveries arriving at odd hours, lights visible from certain windows despite the supposed vacancy, and strange mechanical sounds emanating from the building late at night. "My husband delivered lumber there in December." Martha Collins stated in a deposition taken in 1902, he said Walter met him at the service entrance and instructed him to stack the wood in the basement. He glimpsed what he described as hospital equipment being installed in one of the lower rooms. When he inquired about it, Walter told him they were establishing a small infirmary for guests who might fall ill during their stay. It seemed a thoughtful addition, though peculiar in its timing, during the off-season when no guests were present. The second season commenced in May of 1891, with even more guests booking extended stays. The Thornfield brothers expanded their staff, hiring additional housekeepers, a full-time cook, and a groundskeeper. All were local residents except for their personal valet, Joseph Miller, who had accompanied them from St. Louis. It was during this period that the brothers established what they called their distinguished guest program, inviting select visitors to participate in exclusive dinners and private tours of the surrounding wilderness. These guests were invariably wealthy, often traveling alone or as couples without children, and frequently had minimal connections to family or business associates who might inquire after their welfare. According to hotel registers recovered during the investigation, 27 guests were designated as distinguished during the 1891 season. Of these, 14 would later be confirmed missing by authorities in their home cities. The others investigators would discover had likely met similar fates, but their disappearances had gone unreported or uninvestigated due to their solitary lifestyles. The brothers were remarkably adept at identifying suitable targets, noted Detective Michael Collins in his final report. They selected individuals whose absence would not trigger immediate concern or investigation. Wealthy widows or widowers, bachelors with few family connections, couples estranged from their relatives. In several cases, they arranged for telegrams to be sent from subsequent destinations on the guests' planned itineraries, maintaining the illusion that the individual had simply continued their travels. The Thornfield brothers operated with remarkable efficiency. Their methodology, reconstructed through physical evidence and the testimony of Joseph Miller, their reluctant assistant who would eventually provide crucial information to authorities, was disturbingly systematic. Distinguished guests were assigned to specific rooms on the third floor, East Wing, where the brothers had installed concealed observation points in the walls. From these vantage points, they studied their victims' habits, when they slept, what medications they took, whether they locked their doors. On the selected night, usually toward the end of the guests' scheduled stay, Walter would administer a sedative in their evening tea, served as a house specialty to distinguished guests. Once unconscious, the victim would be transported via a concealed elevator, ostensibly installed as a dumbwaiter for service staff, to the basement level, where the brothers had constructed what Miller would later describe as a workshop of horrors. The room was clinically clean, Miller stated in his signed confession. White tile floors that could be washed down, drains built into the floor, specialized tables with restraints. Edwin had medical training, though I never learned where he studied. He approached his work with detached precision, as if conducting scientific research rather than acts of depravity. Miller, hired as a general handyman in early 1891, claimed he discovered the brothers' activities accidentally when he entered the basement through an unlocked door while searching for tools. According to his testimony, the brothers gave him a choice: assist them or become their next subject. Out of fear, he chose the former, though his exact role in the subsequent events remains a matter of historical debate. What is not debated, however, is the existence of Edwin Thornfield's journals, discovered behind a false wall in his private quarters. These 13 leather-bound volumes, now housed in the sealed archives of the Missouri State Historical Society, detail his experiments with clinical detachment. The journals were deemed too disturbing for public release, with only selected excerpts made available to researchers under strict supervision. One such excerpt, included in the official investigation report, reads, Subject 17 demonstrated exceptional resistance to Procedure C, maintaining consciousness for 47 seconds longer than previous subjects. I have adjusted the formula accordingly for future applications. Walter suggests we modify the soundproofing in Room 3, as the acoustics proved inadequate during the heightened response phase. Another entry, dated September 1891, provides insight into Edwin's distorted perspective. The common man lives and dies without contributing anything to human understanding. Our subjects, however unwilling, advance knowledge in ways they could never comprehend. Their final moments yield more valuable data than decades of their trivial existence otherwise would. In this, we offer them a form of immortality they do not deserve, but receive nonetheless. The brothers' operation continued undetected through 1892 and into 1893, with an estimated 38 additional victims. Their confidence grew, as did the scope of their activities. According to Miller's testimony, they began to select local victims as well, primarily transient workers or individuals passing through the area who would not be immediately missed. The town of Blackwell, meanwhile, continued to view the Thornfield brothers as respected businessmen and benefactors. They funded the town's first proper hospital, a small facility with 6 beds that opened in January of 1892. Edwin occasionally offered his services there, particularly in cases requiring surgical intervention, furthering his reputation as a man of both means and compassion. He had a remarkable bedside manner, recalled Nurse Sarah Jenkins in a statement given in 1902. Patients trusted him implicitly. He could calm the most anxious individual with just a few words and the lightest touch on their hand. Looking back, that skill seems far more sinister now, knowing what we know. The first significant disruption to their operation occurred in July of 1893, when a fire broke out in the hotel kitchen. While quickly contained, the incident brought unwanted attention from the town's volunteer fire brigade, who had to enter portions of the building normally restricted to staff. Though nothing suspicious was discovered, Walter Thornfield's reaction to the firefighters' presence was noted as unusually hostile by Fire Captain Robert Anderson. "He was adamant we leave immediately once the fire was out," Anderson later testified. "When I mentioned standard procedure required us to check for hot spots in adjacent walls, he became agitated, insisting he would handle it himself. There was something unnatural in his manner, something that stayed with me. At the time, I attributed it to the natural distress of seeing one's property damaged. But in retrospect, his reaction was disproportionate to the minimal damage sustained." The second disruption came in September of the same year, when Margaret Wilkins, a housekeeper at the hotel, disappeared. Unlike their carefully selected victims, Wilkins was a known quantity in the community, a widow with 2 children and an elderly mother who depended on her income. Her disappearance prompted questions, first from her family, then from Sheriff Williams, who paid an official visit to the hotel. According to Sheriff's Department records, Walter explained that Wilkins had received news of a sick relative in Tennessee and had departed suddenly, leaving a note resigning her position. He produced such a note, which Wilkins's mother insisted could not have been written by her daughter, as Margaret was unable to write more than her name. Despite these concerns, no formal investigation was launched, as Sheriff Williams had been a recipient of the Thornfields' generosity, frequently dining at the hotel free of charge. The sheriff's reluctance to investigate thoroughly was later interpreted by some as evidence of complicity, wrote historian Richard Barton in his 1962 book, Ozarks Shadows, Forgotten Crimes of the Region. However, contemporary accounts suggest it was more likely a combination of deference to the brothers' social standing and the prevailing attitude toward working women, whose movements were considered less worthy of official concern than those of wealthier citizens. The operation might have continued indefinitely had it not been for the unexpected arrival of Victor Thornfield, the brother's cousin from Boston, in April of 1894. Victor, a professor of anatomy at Harvard Medical School, had received a letter from Edwin inviting him to visit and discuss shared academic interests. What Edwin failed to realize was that Victor had long since abandoned the darker proclivities that had apparently bonded the 3 men in their youth. Victor's 3-day stay at the hotel was documented in his own journal, later submitted as evidence. In it, he describes his growing horror as Edwin gradually revealed the nature of their work, culminating in an invitation to observe an advanced procedure scheduled for the evening of April 7th. "I feigned illness to avoid the demonstration," Victor wrote. "I cannot be party to such abomination." Edwin has descended into madness, dragging Walter with him. They speak of their actions in terms of scientific inquiry, but there is nothing of science in what they do. It is depravity masked as research. "I must alert the authorities, though I fear what such revelation will mean for our family name." Victor's journal entries provide the only glimpse into the brothers' background and potential motivations. According to his account, all 3 had studied medicine together. Briefly at the University of Pennsylvania in the 870s, Edwin had shown exceptional promise but was dismissed under unclear circumstances involving unauthorized use of cadavers. Walter, less academically gifted but devoted to his younger brother, left the program in solidarity. Victor continued his studies, eventually specializing in anatomical research through conventional ethical channels. Edwin always believed the restrictions placed on medical inquiry were arbitrary and rooted in superstition rather than reason, Victor wrote. He spoke often of earlier centuries when anatomists advanced knowledge through means now considered unconscionable. He saw himself as part of that tradition, not bound by what he termed temporary moral fashions. I believed his talk was philosophical in nature. I never imagined he would actualize these ideas in such a methodical manner. Victor departed hastily the following morning, allegedly to catch a train back to Boston. Instead, he traveled to Jefferson City, where he presented his concerns to the state police. His account was initially dismissed as fantastic, possibly motivated by family disputes or inheritance matters. It would be another 3 weeks before State Detective Michael Collins was assigned to make a preliminary inquiry, by which time Victor Thornfield had returned to Boston, his academic reputation too valuable to risk further involvement. Detective Collins arrived in Blackwell on May 2, 1894, presenting himself as a potential investor interested in similar hotel developments in the region. He was given a tour by Walter, noting in his report the exceptional attention to security and unusual modifications to standard hotel architecture. He was assigned room 28, not one of the designated distinguished guest rooms, but he reported hearing mechanical sounds in the walls during the night. On his second day, Collins managed to inspect portions of the basement level under the pretense of assessing the foundation for his own potential building project. He reported finding locked doors and being quickly redirected by Walter. That evening, he noted that his dinner wine had an unusual aftertaste, and, suspecting he might be drugged, emptied most of it into a potted plant when unobserved. Collins feigned drowsiness and retired early, barricading his door with a chair. Around midnight, he reported hearing someone attempt to open his door, then depart after finding it secured. In the morning, he checked out, citing a telegram requiring his immediate return to Jefferson City. In reality, he took a room at the Blackwell Inn in town and began organizing a formal raid of the property. Before this could occur, however, the Thornfield Hotel burned to the ground on the night of May 5, 1894. The fire was reported by multiple witnesses as having started simultaneously in different sections of the building, strongly suggesting arson. By the time the volunteer fire brigade arrived, the structure was fully engulfed. No bodies were recovered from the ruins, and the Thornfield brothers were declared missing. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, Collins wrote in his report. Someone had warned them of the impending investigation. Given the brothers' integration into the community and the sheriff's known association with them, there were multiple potential sources for such a leak. In the aftermath, as the embers cooled, Detective Collins led an inspection of what remained, particularly focusing on the basement level, portions of which had survived the fire. What they discovered confirmed Victor Thornfield's claims, and worse, specialized equipment, restraints, collection vessels, and most disturbingly, a hidden chamber containing preserved specimens, later determined to be human remains. The discovery silenced even the brothers' most steadfast defenders in the community, reported the Springfield Daily News on May 12, 1894. Sheriff Williams, visibly shaken after viewing the evidence, immediately issued warrants for the arrest of both Thornfields on multiple charges of murder. The town council voted unanimously to revoke all honors previously bestowed upon the brothers and to remove their names from the hospital donor plaque. A statewide manhunt for the Thornfield brothers was launched, but yielded no immediate results. It was as if they had vanished as completely as their victims. Joseph Miller, who had been in town during the fire, was taken into custody and eventually provided his testimony in exchange for immunity from prosecution. His account filled in many of the operational details but offered no insight into the brothers' current whereabouts. According to hotel records recovered from the brothers' bank deposit box in Springfield, the hotel had hosted approximately 340 guests during its operation, with 67 designated as distinguished in the private register maintained by Edwin. Based on Miller's testimony and physical evidence from the site, investigators estimated that at least 41 individuals had fallen victim to the brothers' activities at the Thornfield location alone. The precise number will never be known, Collins noted in his final report. The fire destroyed much of the evidence, and the brothers' method of disposing of remains, apparently in remote locations throughout the region, makes a complete accounting impossible. This case represents one of the most extensive and methodical series of murders in the state's history, perhaps in the nation's. For nearly 7 years, the case remained open, but inactive. The ruins of the Thornfield Hotel were left to decay, avoided by locals who reported strange sounds or sensations when passing nearby. The land was seized by the county for unpaid taxes, but no one would purchase it, despite its prime location and view. Which brings us back to Dr. Thomas Hayes and his snowy journey to the abandoned hotel site in November of 1901. According to his sworn statement, upon arriving at the ruins, Hayes found no obvious signs of who might have summoned him. The main structure was long gone, with only stone foundations and partial basement walls remaining. As he called out, receiving only the echo of his own voice in return, he noticed a faint light emanating from what had once been the cellar entrance. Descending the damaged stairs, Hayes discovered a makeshift shelter had been established in the only intact corner of the basement. Inside, lying on a crude pallet, was an emaciated man he eventually identified as Edwin Thornfield. 7 years of hiding had taken their toll. Edwin was dying, his body ravaged by tuberculosis. He was barely recognizable as the man I had known, Hayes stated in his report. His once robust frame had withered to skeletal proportions. His eyes, however, retained their unsettling intensity. He recognized me immediately, addressing me by name, though we had interacted only a handful of times during his residence in Blackwell. Edwin, between labored breaths, revealed that he had been living in various remote locations throughout the Ozarks since the fire, occasionally returning to the ruins when his illness made travel impossible. Walter, he claimed, had died 2 years earlier from pneumonia while they were hiding in an abandoned mining camp near the Arkansas border. He spoke of his brother with a strange mixture of contempt and admiration, Hayes reported. He described Walter as essential but limited, suggesting that their operation had been primarily his own vision, with Walter serving as implementer and facilitator. He expressed no remorse for their activities, referring to their victims as contributors to what he called the advancement of certain knowledge. What prompted Edwin to summon Hayes remains a matter of speculation. The doctor reported that Edwin refused medical assistance, seeming to know his condition was terminal. Instead, he presented Hayes with a key and instructions to locate a metal box supposedly buried beneath a specific oak tree 300 yards east of the hotel site. Hayes, against his better judgment but driven by clinical curiosity, followed the directions and discovered the box exactly as described. Inside were 2 items, a final journal written by Edwin during his years in hiding, and a detailed map marked with 37 locations across the Ozark region. The journal, which Hayes immediately turned over to authorities, contained Edwin's reflections on their work, written without remorse or recognition of its depravity. More disturbingly, it revealed that the brothers had established 3 other similar operations in different states prior to arriving in Missouri, each time abandoning the location when suspicion arose. We perfected our methodology in Pennsylvania, refined it in Illinois, and expanded it in Tennessee, Edwin wrote. Missouri represented our most ambitious endeavor, with the most substantial facilities and the broadest selection criteria. Had circumstances permitted, we would have continued to evolve our approach, perhaps establishing permanent research facilities rather than the temporary arrangements necessitated by commercial cover operations. The map, forensic analysis would later confirm, indicated the disposal sites of additional victims, individuals who had never stayed at the hotel but had encountered the brothers during their time in the region. These included traveling salesmen, itinerant workers, and in several cases, hikers or nature enthusiasts who had ventured into the remote areas where the brothers had temporarily established residence. Edwin Thornfield died during that same night, according to Hayes, who returned the following morning with Sheriff Williams and 2 deputies. The body was removed to the town morgue, where an autopsy confirmed advanced tuberculosis as the cause of death. He was buried in an unmarked grave in unconsecrated ground per the sheriff's orders. Even in death he maintained an aura of menace, Hayes wrote in his personal journal, discovered among his effects after his own passing in 1917. I have treated many terminal patients, witnessed many last breaths, but never have I felt such a sense of lingering presence. It was as if some essential darkness remained even as life departed. I find myself unable to forget his final words to me, "We are not finished here." The subsequent investigation, conducted jointly by county officials and state police, located 23 sets of remains at sites indicated on the map. The other locations either yielded no discoveries or were impossible to search due to natural changes in the landscape over the intervening years. In Edwin's final journal, he made reference to locations in Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Tennessee where he and Walter had conducted similar operations prior to establishing themselves in Missouri. Authorities in those states were notified, but with limited specific information and the passage of time, their investigations yielded minimal results. A hotel in eastern Tennessee that had burned under suspicious circumstances in 1888 was tentatively linked to the brothers, but no definitive evidence was recovered. The case was officially closed in June of 1902, though several aspects remained unresolved. The true count of victims will never be known with certainty. The brothers' motivation, beyond Edwin's clinical notes about advancing understanding through direct observation, remains a subject of psychological debate. Most significantly, the question of whether they had collaborators beyond Joseph Miller was never definitively answered. Miller himself lived under the shadow of suspicion for the remainder of his life, despite his cooperation with authorities. He relocated to Illinois in 1903, where he worked as a janitor until his death in 1931. In a letter to the Blackwell Register, published posthumously at his request, he maintained that his involvement was coerced, writing, "Not a day passes that I don't hear their voices in my dreams, offering the same terrible choice. I chose life then, and have lived with death ever since." The Thornfield case gradually faded from public consciousness, overshadowed by newer crimes and the passage of time. The land where the hotel once stood remained undeveloped until 1967, when the property was purchased by the Ozarks Natural Heritage Foundation and designated as a nature preserve. The foundation's director, William Carpenter, stated that the decision was made to return to natural beauty a place once tainted by human darkness. No mention of the land's history appears on the hiking trail markers or informational plaques now present at the site. Yet local memory persists. Residents of Blackwell, now a small tourist town catering to outdoor enthusiasts, still refer to the hill as Thornfield or sometimes simply the Bad Place. Hikers occasionally report disorientation when passing through the area or the sensation of being observed from the surrounding forest. Park rangers attribute these experiences to the natural acoustic properties of the landscape and the power of suggestion. In 1968, during construction of a trail observation platform, workers uncovered a previously unknown section of the hotel's basement. A narrow chamber containing a leather satchel with medical instruments and a partial guest register from 1893. These items were transferred to the Missouri State Historical Society, where they joined the other artifacts from the case in restricted archives. Dr. Eleanor Jensen, who examined these artifacts while researching her 1969 book, Pathological Tourism, Hospitality as Hunting Ground, noted that the medical instruments showed signs of extensive use and methodical maintenance. These were not the tools of an amateur or sadist seeking immediate gratification, she wrote. They reflect professional knowledge applied with deliberate purpose. Whatever drove the Thornfield brothers, it was not mere bloodlust, but something colder and more calculated. Jensen's research, considered the most comprehensive academic examination of the case, was abruptly discontinued when the Historical Society revoked her access to the archives following complaints about the disturbing nature of her preliminary findings. Her book was published with significantly redacted information, and she never returned to the subject in her subsequent work. The Society claimed my approach was sensationalistic, Jensen stated, in a 1972 interview with the University of Missouri student newspaper. In reality, I believe they were uncomfortable with my conclusions regarding the brothers' motivations and methodology. The Thornfield case suggests something deeply unsettling about human nature that we prefer not to acknowledge, that systematic evil can wear the mask of progress, rationality, and refinement. The final strange chapter in the Thornfield saga came in 1952, when a history professor from the University of Missouri received an anonymous package containing what appeared to be Walter Thornfield's personal diary, covering the period from 1887 to 1893. The authentication of this document remains disputed, as it appeared suspiciously clean and well-preserved for something supposedly hidden for nearly 60 years. Whether authentic or not, the diary presented a troubling alternative perspective on the brothers' relationship. In it, Walter is portrayed not as an equal partner, but as a man in thrall to his younger brother's dominant personality and persuasive abilities. Several entries describe Walter's alleged attempts to leave their arrangement, only to be drawn back by Edwin's manipulation. One entry, dated January 1892, reads, "I suggested again that we could live comfortably on the legitimate proceeds of the hotel. He flew into one of his cold rages, reminding me of Boston and what happened there. He keeps the records of that time locked away, threatening exposure should I ever develop, as he calls it, moral qualms. There is no escape from what we have begun." Another passage from October 1892 provides a disturbing glimpse into their daily operation. 3 distinguished guests arriving tomorrow. E. has already selected the gentleman in room 14 for Thursday evening. He says the man's medical history, heart condition, makes him particularly suitable for the circulatory response study. I find myself unable to meet the guests at breakfast anymore, knowing what awaits some of them. He notices my reluctance and watches me more closely now. The diary disappeared from the university archives in 1954, before a comprehensive analysis could be completed. Its current whereabouts, like so many aspects of this case, remain unknown. What we do know with certainty is that, for 4 years, in a picturesque hotel overlooking the North Fork River, 2 men committed atrocities under the guise of hospitality. They selected their victims carefully, executed their plans methodically, and nearly escaped accountability entirely. Their legacy lives on, not just in the historical record, but in the changed character of the region itself. Blackwell never fully recovered from its association with the Thornfield case. Tourism declined sharply following the national newspaper coverage of the investigation. The logging industry moved operations to more accessible locations. By 1920, the population had dwindled to less than half its 1890 level. Today, it survives primarily as a waypoint for visitors to the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, its dark history mentioned only in passing, if at all, by official guides. For decades, the Missouri Hotel Association lobbied successfully to have the Thornfield case excluded from state history textbooks, fearing its potential impact on tourism. Only in educational materials published after 1972 does the case receive even passing mention, typically as a brief note in chapters discussing law enforcement development in the early 20th century. Yet the story persists in local oral tradition, in academic criminology studies, and in the collective memory of a region shaped by its encounter with methodical evil. The Thornfield brothers, educated, articulate, and outwardly respectable, challenged the community's understanding of what darkness might wear as its public face. Sheriff Williams, who oversaw the final investigation and subsequent recovery efforts, perhaps summarized it best in his retirement speech to the county in 1910. "We look for monsters in the forest, in the night, in the unfamiliar face of a stranger. The Thornfields taught us that sometimes the monster pours your tea, asks about your family, and sends you off to sleep with a friendly word. Sometimes the monster builds its lair in plain sight and calls it progress. In 1963, during renovations to the Blackwell County Courthouse, workers discovered a sealed metal container in a wall cavity near the former sheriff's office. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing what appeared to be a final message from Edwin Thornfield, though forensic analysis was inconclusive regarding its authenticity. The message, composed of just 3 sentences, read, "We were not the first to find that special quiet in the hills. We will certainly not be the last. The air here makes certain ideas grow strong." The paper was transferred to State Archives in Jefferson City, where it remained cataloged but largely forgotten until 1968, when a graduate student happened upon it while researching rural law enforcement practices. By this time, most of those directly involved in the case had passed away, and with them, the immediate impact of the Thornfield brothers' crimes had faded into historical footnote. What remains is the land itself, the rolling hills, the dense forests, the winding river cutting through ancient stone. Hikers on the Thornfield Preserve Trail often pause at the overlook built near where the hotel once stood, admiring the view that once greeted guests arriving with their expensive luggage and unsuspecting minds. They take photographs, consult their trail maps, and continue on their way, unaware that they stand where others once stood with very different purposes. The forest has reclaimed its territory, erasing nearly all physical evidence of what occurred there. Nature, indifferent to human depravity, continues its cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. Perhaps that is fitting, that a place once defined by calculated exploitation of human trust should return to wilderness, where at least the dangers are honest in their presentation. The bear does not disguise its claws. The storm does not hide its lightning behind a welcoming facade. Yet for those who know the history, who have read the accounts or heard the stories passed down through generations of Ozark families, the Thornfield site represents something more, a reminder that civilization's veneer can conceal depths of darkness, that progress and refinement are not incompatible with calculated cruelty. In the winter months, when snow blankets the preserve and visitor numbers dwindle to nearly zero, rangers report an unusual acoustic phenomenon in the vicinity of the former hotel site. Under certain conditions, typically on still, cold nights, sounds seem to carry from impossible distances. Conversations from the ranger station 3 miles away can sometimes be heard with unnatural clarity, as if the very air were designed to transmit human voices. One ranger, who requested anonymity when interviewed for a 1969 regional folklore collection, described spending a night at the observation platform during such conditions. It was like the hill was listening. I know how that sounds, but that's the only way I can describe it. Like the whole place was one big ear, turning toward any sound. I've worked these woods for 12 years and never felt anything like it. I requested a transfer the next morning. The Thornfield brothers may have been products of their time, an era when medical ethics were still evolving, when remote communities offered both isolation and opportunity, when missing persons cases rarely connected across county or state lines. Yet, their methodical approach, their careful selection of victims, and their ability to maintain a respectable public persona while conducting unspeakable activities in private speaks to something timeless in the darker potential of human nature. Their story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous invitation is the one that appears most civilized, the welcoming light of a hotel on a hill, promising comfort to weary travelers far from home. For those who disappeared into the Thornfield Hotel between 1890 and 1894, that promise turned to unimaginable reality behind locked doors. For the rest of us, their story stands as a marker of boundary, a reminder that hospitality can be genuine or can be bait, and that discerning the difference might be the most important judgment a traveler makes. The investigation into the Thornfield case yielded one particularly disturbing detail that was deliberately excluded from newspaper accounts of the time. According to Detective Collins's sealed report, accessed in 1964 by researcher Thomas Blackburn under special permission, the brothers appeared to have been conducting a form of psychological experimentation alongside their physical procedures. Among the documents recovered from Edwin Thornfield's private quarters, Collins wrote, was a ledger containing detailed observations of what he termed anticipatory responses. These entries suggest that in some cases, victims were not immediately rendered unconscious upon being taken to the basement facility, but rather were allowed to regain awareness temporarily in their surroundings. Edwin documented their reactions with clinical precision, noting variations in fear responses, attempts at negotiation, and what he called the moment of comprehension when the victim fully understood their situation. This aspect of the case was deliberately suppressed at the time, deemed too disturbing for public consumption and potentially damaging to the ongoing investigation into the brothers' earlier activities in other states. Even in the official court records, these details were relegated to appendices accessible only to judicial authorities. Edwin's journal entries regarding these observations reveal a disturbing perspective on human psychology. Fear, properly cultivated, produces physiological changes that alter tissue composition, he wrote in an entry dated August 1892. The distinction between specimens obtained under sedation versus those harvested during peak awareness is remarkable and consistent. This suggests promising applications that Walter fails to appreciate fully. The implications of these notes troubled even the medical examiners assigned to review the evidence. Dr. Harrison Fletcher of the Missouri State Medical Board noted in his confidential assessment, "The precision of Thornfield's observations, coupled with his systematic variation of conditions, indicates a horrifying but undeniably methodical approach. He appears to have been conducting what amounts to a grotesque form of human experimentation under the guise of a commercial hospitality enterprise." The hotel's design itself reflected this methodical approach. Architectural drawings recovered from the Springfield Bank, where the brothers maintained a safe deposit box, revealed that certain guest rooms had been constructed with concealed observation points, not just for monitoring potential victims, but also for documenting their behavior, patterns, sleep habits, and private moments. "The level of premeditation is unprecedented in my experience," wrote Collins. Most criminal enterprises of this nature display elements of opportunity, impulse, or escalation over time. The Thornfield operation appears to have been fully conceptualized before the first foundation stone was laid. The hotel was not a cover for their activities. It was a purpose-built facility designed specifically for them. This long-term planning extended to their financial arrangements as well. Banking records examined during the investigation revealed that the brothers had established elaborate contingency funds under various names in banks across multiple states. These accounts remained untouched during the hotel's operation, but were systematically emptied in the weeks preceding the fire, suggesting they had anticipated the eventual need for a rapid departure. The brothers maintained a facade of legitimate business while preparing meticulously for eventual discovery, noted U. S. Marshal James Harrington, who was briefly involved in the interstate aspects of the case. This duality, functioning as respected community members while simultaneously planning for their exposure and escape, speaks to a level of psychological compartmentalization that borders on the pathological. When Dr. Hayes encountered Edwin Thornfield in the ruins of the hotel in 1901, he reported asking him directly about his motivations. According to Hayes's testimony, Edwin's response was as enigmatic as it was disturbing. "We do not expect the caterpillar to comprehend the butterfly." Similarly, the work we pursued exists in a context beyond conventional understanding. The question is not why we did what we did, but why others do not recognize the necessity of such inquiry. This sense of exceptional purpose, of operating beyond normal moral constraints in pursuit of some greater understanding, permeates Edwin's writings. His final journal, recovered from the metal box Hayes discovered, contains passages reflecting on the brothers' legacy. History will eventually recognize our contributions once the temporary moral panic subsides. All meaningful advancement requires sacrifices that seem unconscionable to contemporary sensibilities. In 2 generations, perhaps less, our methods will be viewed with clinical interest rather than horror. The journal also revealed that Edwin had maintained contact with unnamed associates in the medical field during his years in hiding, suggesting a disturbing possibility that the brothers' methodology had been shared with others who might continue their work in different locations. Authorities investigated several medical researchers mentioned by code names in the journal, but no definitive connections were established. One of the most troubling aspects of the case emerged from interviews with former hotel staff who had worked at the Thornfield during its years of operation. Many described an atmosphere of subtle intimidation and constant surveillance, even for employees not directly involved in or aware of the brothers' true activities. Walter had a way of appearing exactly when you were taking a moment's rest, recalled former groundskeeper Thomas Jenkins in a statement given in 1902. He would emerge from a doorway or turn a corner just as you paused in your work, always with that same pleasant smile, always with a gentle reminder about some task. After a while, you began to feel watched even when alone. I believe now that was deliberate, a system of control that extended beyond the guests to the staff as well. Several employees reported that the brothers frequently tested their loyalty through minor ethical challenges, asking them to lie to guests about availability, to misplace items of correspondence, or to report on the conversations and habits of other staff members. Those who demonstrated a willingness to bend rules were given additional responsibilities and compensation, while those who hesitated found their positions becoming increasingly untenable. It was a process of selection, observed Detective Collins in his final assessment. The brothers were identifying individuals susceptible to influence, gradually normalizing small transgressions that could later be leveraged into compliance with larger ones. This systematic corruption of normal ethical boundaries appears to have been as methodical as every other aspect of their operation. The Thornfield Hotel itself became something of a legend in architectural circles, particularly among those studying the relationship between design and psychological manipulation. The brothers had incorporated subtle elements throughout the a structure that created a sense of disorientation and dependency in guests. Hallways that appeared straight but actually curved slightly, windows positioned to distort the perception of distance, acoustics engineered to carry certain sounds, while dampening others. The entire structure functioned as a sophisticated apparatus for control, wrote architectural historian Margaret Whitman in her 1965 analysis of the surviving blueprints. Guests were subtly guided through spaces designed to evoke specific psychological responses, comfort in public areas, isolation in private ones. The third floor, where distinguished guests were housed, incorporated design elements that would induce subtle anxiety and sleep disturbance, potentially making victims more susceptible to suggestion and chemical sedation. This architectural manipulation extended to the town of Blackwell itself. During their years of operation, the Thornfield brothers systematically purchased key properties throughout the community, establishing a network of influence that made them central to the town's economic and social functioning. By 1893, they owned the building housing the newspaper office, held the mortgage on the sheriff's home, and had provided loans to nearly half the business owners on Main Street. They created a closed system, noted sociologist Dr. Robert Chambers in his 1968 study of the case. The townspeople became dependent on the brothers' continued goodwill, creating an environment where questioning their activities carried significant personal risk. This systemic capture of community oversight mechanisms allowed their operation to continue far longer than it might have in a more independent setting. The brothers' influence extended to the local medical community as well. Edwin had established himself as a consulting physician at the small hospital they had funded, giving him access to medical records and patient histories that may have informed their victim selection process. Several patients treated by Edwin for minor ailments later became guests at the hotel and subsequently disappeared. The integration of their criminal enterprise with legitimate medical practice represents a particularly disturbing aspect of the case, wrote Dr. Fletcher in his assessment. Edwin Thornfield appears to have used his position of medical authority to identify vulnerable individuals and gather information that facilitated their subsequent victimization. This betrayal of the physician's essential oath represents a corruption of medicine itself. The investigation into the Thornfield case had wider implications for law enforcement practices across the country. The brothers' ability to operate across state lines, establishing similar operations in multiple locations before arriving in Missouri, highlighted the limitations of localized policing in addressing mobile criminal enterprises. Within 5 years of the case's conclusion, several states had established formal information-sharing protocols for suspicious disappearances, creating an early version of what would eventually evolve into modern interstate law enforcement cooperation. The Thornfield case demonstrated that the increasing mobility of the American population required a corresponding evolution in investigative approaches, wrote criminologist Edward Fitzgerald in his 2022 Analysis Modern Criminal Investigation. Locally, authorities could no longer operate in isolation when confronting sophisticated criminal enterprises that deliberately exploited jurisdictional boundaries. For the town of Blackwell, the revelation of what had occurred at the Thornfield Hotel created a trauma from which the community never fully recovered. In the immediate aftermath, several businesses closed as tourism collapsed. The town council held emergency sessions to discuss changing the town's name to distance it from the publicity surrounding the case, though this proposal was ultimately rejected. "There's no escaping what happened here," Mayor Frederick Johnson stated at a town meeting in June 1894. "According to minutes preserved in county records, we must acknowledge it, learn from it, and ensure nothing of its kind ever occurs in our community again. Changing our name would be an attempt to hide from our failure to see what was happening in our midst." The psychological impact on those who had interacted with the brothers, particularly those who had unwittingly assisted their operation, was severe and lasting. Several hotel employees required treatment for what physicians of the time described as nervous exhaustion or moral shock. The town's minister, Reverend Isaiah Matthews, reported in his personal correspondence that attendance at confession increased dramatically in the months following the revelations, with many townspeople expressing guilt over their failure to recognize or act upon subtle warning signs. The brothers' greatest achievement, wrote Dr. Jensen in her analysis, may have been their ability to implicate an entire community in their actions through a campaign of gradual normalization. By the time their activities reached their peak, they had rendered the town partially blind to abnormalities that would have immediately triggered alarm in other contexts. In the decades following the Thornfield case, the site of the hotel became the focus of both academic interest and morbid curiosity. Throughout the early 1900s, authorities regularly dispersed unauthorized excavations by souvenir hunters seeking relics from the ruins. Several items allegedly recovered from the site appeared in private collections or were offered for sale in specialized markets, though their authenticity remained questionable. The land's eventual designation as a nature preserve in 1967 was partly motivated by a desire to provide appropriate stewardship for a location that continued to draw unwanted attention. The Ozark Natural Heritage Foundation established strict regulations prohibiting any disturbance of the soil or remaining structures, effectively ending unauthorized excavations. "Our primary goal is to allow natural processes to reclaim this space," Foundation Director Carpenter stated at the dedication ceremony. "The forest doesn't remember what occurred here. It simply grows, season after season, gradually erasing the physical remnants of human activity, whether benign or malevolent. There is a certain healing in that process that seems appropriate for this particular location. Despite these efforts, the Thornfield case continues to exert a strange influence on those who study it." Several researchers who have delved deeply into the archives have reported experiencing what psychologists term vicarious trauma, psychological distress resulting from engagement with deeply disturbing material. Dr. Jensen abandoned her research after experiencing persistent nightmares in which she found herself trapped in endlessly recurring hotel corridors. Thomas Blackburn, who accessed the sealed reports in 1964, requested that his notes be destroyed following the completion of his research, citing a persistent sense of contamination from prolonged exposure to the case materials. There is something uniquely disturbing about the Thornfield case that distinguishes it from other historical crimes of similar or even greater magnitude, wrote criminal psychologist Dr. Margaret Hollis in her 1971 paper, Psychological Responses to Historical Atrocity. The combination of the brothers' articulate self-justification, the methodical nature of their activities, and their successful integration into community life creates a narrative that challenges our fundamental assumptions about the recognizability of evil. This challenge to conventional understanding perhaps explains the case's enduring presence in the region's collective consciousness. Unlike supernatural legends or folkloric cautionary tales, the Thornfield story represents a documented historical reality that defies comfortable categorization. The brothers were not obviously deranged, socially isolated, or visibly disturbed. They were successful, respected community members whose external presentation gave no indication of their private activities. The most terrifying aspect of the Thornfield case is not what the brothers did, but what it reveals about our limited ability to identify dangerous individuals in our midst, Dr. Hollis continued. If men capable of such calculated cruelty could function as valued citizens, what does that tell us about the reliability of our social trust mechanisms? This fundamental question, more than the specific horrors they perpetrated, may explain why the case continues to disturb us more than a century later. For modern visitors to the region, the Thornfield Preserve represents simply another beautiful viewpoint in the Ozark landscape. The official trail guide mentions only that the area was once the site of a historic hotel, with no reference to the events that occurred there. Yet local tour guides occasionally share abbreviated versions of the story with interested visitors, and amateur historians make regular pilgrimages to the site. People want to stand where it happened, observed park ranger Michael Davis in a 1968 interview with the Springfield Daily News. They want to try to make sense of it, to see if the place itself offers some explanation that the historical record doesn't. Of course, it doesn't. The trees and rocks don't remember. But people keep coming anyway, looking for something they can't quite articulate. Perhaps this search for understanding represents the Thornfield brothers' final legacy, a persistent questioning of how such methodical cruelty could exist, alongside apparent normalcy, and what that might imply about human nature itself. In a region rich with folklore and supernatural legends, the thoroughly documented, entirely human horrors of the Thornfield Hotel stand as a reminder that the most disturbing monsters are not those that lurk in forests or caves, but those that might pour our tea, engage us in pleasant conversation, and send us off to sleep with a friendly word. As Sheriff Williams observed in his retirement speech, the Thornfields taught us to question the face of respectability itself, to recognize that evil need not announce itself with any visible sign, but might instead wear the mask of progress, refinement, and civilization. That lesson, painful as it was for our community to learn, may be their one genuine contribution to human understanding. In 1963, during renovations to the Blackwell County Courthouse, workers discovered a sealed metal container in a wall cavity near the former sheriff's office. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing what appeared to be a final message from Edwin Thornfield, though forensic analysis was inconclusive regarding its authenticity. The message, composed of just 3 sentences, read, "We were not the first to find that special quiet in the hills. We will certainly not be the last." The air here makes certain ideas grow strong. The paper was transferred to state archives in Jefferson City, where it remained cataloged but largely forgotten until 1968, when a graduate student happened upon it while researching rural law enforcement practices. By this time, Most of those directly involved in the case had passed away, and with them the immediate impact of the Thornfield brothers' crimes had faded into historical footnote. What remains is the land itself, the rolling hills, the dense forests, the winding river cutting through ancient stone. Hikers on the Thornfield Preserve Trail often pause at the overlook, built near where the hotel once stood, admiring the view that once greeted guests arriving with their expensive luggage and unsuspecting minds. They take photographs, consult their trail maps, and continue on their way, unaware that they stand where others once stood with very different purposes. The forest has reclaimed its territory, erasing nearly all physical evidence of what occurred there. Nature, indifferent to human depravity, continues its cycles of growth, decay, and renewal. Perhaps that is fitting, that a place once defined by calculated exploitation of human trust should return to wilderness, where at least the dangers are honest in their presentation. The bear does not disguise its claws. The storm does not hide its lightning behind a welcoming facade. Yet, for those who know the history, who have read the accounts or heard the stories passed down through generations of Ozark families, the Thornfield site represents something more, a reminder that civilization's veneer can conceal depths of darkness, that progress and refinement are not incompatible with calculated cruelty. In the winter months, when snow blankets the preserve and visitor numbers dwindle to nearly zero, rangers report an unusual acoustic phenomenon in the vicinity of the former hotel site. Under certain conditions, typically on still, cold nights, sounds seem to carry from impossible distances. Conversations from the ranger station 3 miles away can sometimes be heard with unnatural clarity, as if the very air were designed to transmit human voices. One ranger who requested anonymity when interviewed for a 1969 regional folklore collection described spending a night at the observation platform during such conditions. It was like the hill was listening. I know how that sounds, but that's the only way I can describe it. Like the whole place was one big ear turning toward any sound. I've worked these woods for 12 years and never felt anything like it. I requested a transfer the next morning. The Thornfield brothers may have been products of their time, an era when medical ethics were still evolving, when remote communities offered both isolation and opportunity, when missing persons cases rarely connected across county or state lines. Yet their methodical approach, their careful selection of victims, and their ability to maintain a respectable public persona while conducting unspeakable activities in private speaks to something timeless in the darker potential of human nature. Their story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous invitation is the one that appears most civilized, the welcoming light of a hotel on a hill, promising comfort to weary travelers far from home. For those who disappeared into the Thornfield Hotel between 1890 and 1894, that promise turned to unimaginable reality behind locked doors. For the rest of us, their story stands as a marker of boundary, a reminder that hospitality can be genuine or can be bait, and that discerning the difference might be the most important judgment a traveler makes. The next time you find yourself checking into a hotel in an unfamiliar place, perhaps you'll remember the Thornfield brothers and their attention to detail, their impeccable manners, their careful observation of their guests' habits. Perhaps you'll turn the lock twice instead of once, or decline that complimentary nightcap offered with a solicitous smile. After all, as the Blackwell County Historical Society's discreet plaque at the trailhead now reads, "History speaks most clearly through its silences." Listen carefully to what is not said.